finish. Huh? Oh, all right. So let's very quick finish what happened there. We had Joseph Smith, and because the issue of plural marriage, we can't go all the details of Illinois politics. But what's going to happen was non-Mormons around Nauvoo essentially revolted. And he is going to be arrested, worry about the details of that, but Joseph Smith is going to be lynched. Now, when I say lynched, you know what that means. Normally people think hanging that, in reality means basically tortured to death. And he would be shot and beaten. So Joseph Smith is going to be murdered by this mob. Furious about, as they saw it, this blasphemy of plural marriage. They obviously have different points of view on what plural marriage was. But they're on Nauvoo, and they realized we better get the heck out of here because of what happened in Missouri, plus we Ohio, and now Illinois. And so that's when they decided to leave the country. Now under the leadership of Brigham Young, beginning 18, actually it's a year earlier, they would already be sending scouts out in case they had to leave the country. And decided to leave the country and go to Utah. Utah's in what country at this time? In Mexico. So they're leaving the country. And they thought they might have to leave the Americans. Totally, we'll get to that in 1 second. And very close to the Oregon Trail, that along here, sometimes on the Oregon Trail, sometimes leaving it because the feeling was we have to be a little bit separate from everybody else because of potential persecution. They travel westward on what's called the Mormon Trail. So, for example, there's a few spots here, like in Nebraska, where it has like a sign on the Oregon Trail, and then it'll have a sign, Mormon Trail 15 miles north. So just kind of interesting. They went on basically parallel, but they wanted to be a little bit separate. And why Utah? Not only was it out of the country, the same reason why this area was so difficult for the Oregon Trail. It's in a big, massive basin right here. That's why there's a Great Salt Lake here. Water doesn't flow to the sea. It's very dry, but what water does have flows through one spot. Think about all the minerals and all the salts in the soil it takes with it. Years of evaporation leads to the water of the lake that's here, incredibly salty, thus the Great Salt Lake. And they picked that because they figured no one's going to move it. That's the reason why. So they arrived. This is actually another migration about 30 years later. But it's a good picture. At least gives you an idea what it was like, even though some went by foot, carrying whatever they had on little hand carts. But they arrived in Utah. This would be their Zion. And that's the Mormon Trail right there in blue. And that is a picture of the city that Brigham Young would make. He personally stepped off the streets of Salt Lake City and did it in the grid pattern that was becoming kind of established for city planning. You can see it's going back to the 16th century. And it's a really well-organized city. If you go to Salt Lake City, it's one of the easiest big cities to drive around in I've ever been. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of traffic and 7-lane interstates and everything else, but it's really easy to drive around it. And it's very dry there, so they had to become adept to irrigation. And it's going to take a years, but they would begin to establish themselves. But one more thing, Brigham Young wasn't done yet. This was going on just till the Mexican War began. And he sent people to a Spanish mission right here, a place called, you might have heard of it, Los Angeles, just in case they ever run away again. And they were thinking maybe Samoa, the island of Samoa. So they went there and using the same irrigation, they try to do the same kind of irrigation techniques here. So near a Spanish mission there, they began to dig down in the San Fernando Valley and discovered the San Fernando Aquifer. And they got the water up and began to roll like etc. And that would be the trigger for Los Angeles. So it's one of these strange quirks of fate that this desire to have a safety valve would lead to Los Angeles from the connection to Utah, which I just find this fascinating way that things kind of tie together. So we'll have to come back to this. But that is how this large population of people so basic consider themselves the Americans ended up in Utah. But this underlies the big issue was still slavery in Utah. And once the United States started expanding westward, slavery would become the issue. As you can see from this picture right here, the areas in the darker red, that's a greater percentage of the total population with slaves. And in 1790, the biggest population of enslaved people was in Virginia and South Carolina. But remember diffusion, spread them westward. Oh, you'll also notice there are slaves up here. But it would go away. That was the whole Jeffersonian idea. Here's 1830, you see it expanding westward. And then look by 1860. And this down here. Up, down. And still a large percentage here, but this actually became the biggest market for enslaved people. They'd sell enslaved people here, and then they'd be forced marched through. You notice now in Texas. There should have been spots, there were enslaved people being held in New Mexico. You'll notice Nebraska territory, which I'll get to. And you're sitting in what was Nebraska territory? Utah territory. I'll get to all that, how that happened. So, and what was enslavement territory was the issue that led to the Civil War. What was the trigger of this? Texas. So it's all the expansion westward, but all personified by Texas. Just to review, 1821, Mexico won its independence. I just put down Father Hidalgo. I don't even know why I did. He's one of the most famous Mexican patriots that helped lead its independence. Great painting by Diego Garcia in Mexico City. That's Father Hidalgo. But the point is, they created a Mexican republic. But the problem for Mexico was population, especially in their northern provinces. What are the two most important? They have three basic northern provinces they shared with them: California, New Mexico, and Tejas, which was right here. And they didn't have a large enough population. When I mean population, I mean citizens of Mexico. They need citizens of Mexico to hold on to that territory because they know there's a certain country to the east that is ravenous for land. And they know they have their eyes on this land, the US. So they need Mexicans. The problem is, well, first off, it's 1,000 miles away from Mexico City, and there's a large desert in between Mexico City and Tejas. Mexico is also broke, so indebted after years of revolution and then coming out of the colonization in debt. But there's something else too. The Comanches. The Comanches were a southern plains tribe, very small. Plains tribes were always very small. They had to be. They have to move because of the shortage of water, so the populations have to be small. And they basically carefully decided when they're going to have children for that obvious reason. But nobody took to the horse like the Comanches. So when the Spanish brought back the horse to the Americas and the horses escaped, the Comanches took to them like nobody. And pretty soon it became the myth that they were basically born hunters. Like they couldn't run. There's apocryphal stories about Comanches could hardly walk, but on a horseback as graceful. Now, there were other incredible horsemen on the plains. For example, you've probably heard of the Lakota Sioux, the Cheyenne, like here, the Kiowa tribe that should be relatively familiar. Crow, Pagan, Montana knows Blackfeet, Pagan, Nez Pierce, but nobody like the Comanche. And they were terrified of the Comanche. Their raids would strike fear into anybody. So people were reluctant to come in there, despite the fact that there was really good bottomland for agriculture right there. Bottomland is valley land along rivers. And there's Comanche right there, that's about 1880s. And the story was a young Comanche man, a young boy, would be taught horseback from day one. And riding, now this is without a saddle, basically just rope, and the stirrups, nothing more than a rope. And to prove you are capable, aka an adult, you had to be to ride full gallop, hands free, so just guiding with your legs, and no stirrups. So you have ridden horses know how difficult that is. Bended under the horse's neck, so under, and 50 paces, shoot an arrow and hit a knob on a tree. Full gallop, hanging from a horse under the neck. That's impressive. And it's just terrifying any colonists. They might have had muskets, but it took, 30 seconds at best to load a muskets. For average people, sometimes longer. A hunting rifle might take a minute and a half, and they could get 20 arrows. That happened. The Comanches were fierce. So that limited the number of people that have a militia. So they needed desperate for people to come in. Hey, where are there a lot of people that might come into an area and take the risk? The United States. So Mexico sent feelers out to the United States. They encourage American immigrants, but if they come into Mexico, they must give up must become Mexican citizens and also become Catholics. And the vast majority of people coming are Protestant. So you have a bunch of people take advantage of that. The first one who would organize this would be a man from a relatively wealthy family from Virginia. And then his father moved up to Kentucky and then Arkansas Territory, named Stephen Austin. He was also in Tennessee for a while. And right here is Austin's colony. And brought in citizens of the United States to come into Mexico, to become citizens. Thus the population willing to take the risk of the Comanches. And this is a kind of stylized picture of these people coming in. And quickly these immigrants into Tejas would be dubbed Texans. So it's kind of a mispronunciation of Tejas. The Mexican citizens who lived in Tejas before were called Tejanos, so Tejas. And that's a stylized picture of it. But let me ask you a question. Do you remember, what do you call people who move in the land and just take it without any legal justification? You remember that name? The colonists kind of do that. But remember, Daniel Boone was one of these. Okay, once I show you the term, I hope you all remember. Squatter. You remember that? Like, oh yeah, squatter. Why did squatters follow? They didn't swear an oath to Mexico. They didn't become Catholics. They just came in. And there's something else. Those citizens of the U.S. who came into Mexico, many of them want to profit quick. And either they already had or they borrowed money to purchase enslaved people. Thus, they brought slavery with them. Now, Mexico had slavery of both people from Africa, but also a lot of American Indians. It had been going away, not 100%. It was also slightly different kind of slavery. But anyways, they brought slaves in. And there's something else. All those people who came in, who I swear to be a Mexican, I pledge allegiance to Mexico, I become a Mexican citizen, that's where the oath. Did they mean it? Remember what I told you? People from the United States who went west, they kept America with. They still thought of themselves as Americans. And here is what they called a slave coffin. And a slave coffin was like think about a slave gang, chain gang, a forced march from the United States into Texas, but this would become the symbol of slavery to many. These forced marches from Virginia downriver, and you notice they are chained together. And two things, first off, you notice the fiddlers, those are slaves, but they would fiddle to give them marching music because they have to be in step, because it is chained if they're out of step in that form. One fall, they all fall. And the other thing, see him carrying the American flag. So that's why I chose that for those two reasons. So almost immediately, the Mexicans realized this is not going to work well. And don't forget, Mexico City is 1,000 miles away. So by 1830, this has become a problem. And if you know anything about Mexican geography, a place called the Yucatan had rebelled, other places were rebelling. The Republic was beginning to fall apart. There were rebellions across Central America, and the Republic fell apart in the early 1830s, and eventually a general, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, everyone just calls him Santa Anna, would eventually become president, and from this presidency, make himself dictator. One thing about a republic, if you have a position of president, the president has a lot of power. That was one of the fears of the anti-federalists back in the Constitution in the U.S. Santa Anna became president, and that's very, very difficult time with Santa Anna, Mexico. It's hard because Santa Anna is a brutal dictator that ended that first republic. But he also was a fighter for Mexico. And so you get these 2 points of view where you get Santa Anna condemned for being a dictator and getting rid of a democratic republic and his statue all over Mexico City. It's an interesting thing. So Santa Anna. And Santa Anna realized I cannot maintain power unless I get control of these areas. So what are we doing back here? I see your back of your head. So Santa Anna put down the rebellion in the Yucatan and had to take care of Tejas. And California was becoming an issue too. So they banned immigrants. But the damage was done. And they didn't have enough troops. Mexico was broke. They had a tiny little garrison of militia. And a lot of the militia were Texans. And not only were people coming in here, they were starting to come into California. They couldn't stop them. And so then they decided to undercut the Texans. And what is their financial backing? Slave plantations. So they decided to abolish slavery, hoping to force the Texans to leave. Now, once again, they could not enforce it. Now, Tejanos didn't like Mexico City. They didn't like the dictator. And they did infringe on liberties. But this was the last straw. Slavery. By abolishing slavery, that would trigger a rebellion. The Texans were furious, especially citizens of the U.S. escaping escaping high land prices and soon to be a panic, were coming here expecting to take advantage of this cheap Texan land, bring in slave people, were furious. Mexico responded with, what do you call it when the government, the military takes over complete control, takes over the law, and takes ironclad control? A coup is taking over a government. Close. Has anyone ever heard of martial law? Martial law is where the military comes in and makes the laws. Now, a lot of times after a coup, they declare martial. But they didn't have enough troops. And they're already Texan militia, partially because of slave rebellion, partially because of Comanches. And this is going to trigger the war of for Texan independence. Fall 35 into 36. Oh my goodness, that was and this involved both Texans and Tejanos. Mexicans upset. Furious at, these are Mexican citizens before the Texans arrived, furious at Mexican rule too. I have to send an email very quickly. I know this is the time you've been waiting for. So there was a small Texan Tejano militia, and they were ordered by the local military commander to disarm. What was it disarm? They had 2 6-pound cannons. 6-pound cannon means they fired a 6-pound cannon. Cannonball about that. 12-pound cannon, 12-pound. We get that. That's how they designate cannon. They had a couple of these cannons. And so they refused. And they were going to fight for it to defend it. And they made this on a piece of canvas. And that would become the first flag of Texas. Just a drawing of a cannon, come and take it, and then a single star, which is their connection to the United States. And I got to admit, that is a pretty cool flag. And that would become the first flag of Texas. And they repelled the small Mexican garrison, held their cannon. And once that happened, Santa Anna, when he got word of this, and it's going to take a couple weeks, realized I'm going to have to march north and destroy this rebellion. So it's going to go into 1836. So while that happened, another immigrant arrived by the name of Sam Houston. Oh, I jumped the gun here. It's called the Battle of Gonzales. All about a camp. How do you like that? You can imagine it. Yeah, that'd become big in Texas history. Why not? Even though they're fighting the big issue they went to war, they went to rebellion for was to protect slavery. Sam Houston was a former congressman from Tennessee, fought in the War of 1812. That's a drawing of him there. Was a protege of Andrew Jackson. Was considered an up-and-coming member of Congress, senator from the United States, and then fell into a dark depression after his White House. And after that, he decided, like a lot of citizens of the U.S., if I'm not making it here, let's roll the die and go to Texas. So he went to Texas and arrived just at the beginning of this. And because he had military experience, they gave him command of the Texan militia. And he began to organize this force. They're very poorly equipped, ill-armed, no training, and try to organize it. They picked well. He knew what he was doing, but knew he had long odds because he only had maybe a few thousand men at most, and most of them didn't have. Most of them had no training, hardly any weapons except for hunting rifles, which are terrible for combat. Politician, I forgot to click, sorry. Tennessee politician, commanded the Texan Army. That's him acting like a frontiersman in Tennessee for a campaign. There's a few people. There's another one we'll get to, a guy named Davy Crockett. Same thing. Very similar thing. Tennessee politician, came into political hard times to try to reestablish his reputation in Texas. So, we're coming up to the Battle of the Alamo. And, okay, you notice it goes from February 23rd to March 6th, but really the fighting was only on March 6th. And what happened was Santa Anna marched 5,000. Okay, if I say the word conscription, what is, in the United States, what do we call conscription? The draft. That's how they got most of the Mexican army. Young men were forced in. You understand what the draft is? Join the army, go to jail. Those are your two options. So there's forcing people to go in. Sometimes you might hear it called impressed. All of Europe had the draft. Britain did not have that history, and the U.S. did not either. The first U.S. draft would be during the Civil War. But anyways, back to this. 5,000 men, better equipped than the Texans, but not that well equipped. Mexico was broken. They had to take massive loans out from France to try to pay for this. Now, he had to march across the desert. So he split his group up into two columns. Santa Anna's column, about 2,800 men or so, about 2,500 men here under Urea, General Urea. And his plan was to enter Tejas and use terror, to terrify the Texans. And that means, I think you can get the implications of terror, to force the rest to run away. That's his strategy, because he knows he doesn't have enough men to totally take it over and hold. So he's going to use terror. If you resist, what will happen to you? Santa Anna neared San Antonio. San Antonio was a small little town there, but outside of there was a Spanish mission called the Alamo. And inside the Alamo was a small Texan garrison of about 260 men. And thus, the Battle of the Alamo. This is a very dramatic painting of the actual fight that's at the Alamo. It wasn't quite like this. But the commander of the Alamo was a former lawyer in the U.S., very ambitious, wanting fame. All this, this is not unusual. General William Travis. He was ordered to leave by Sam Houston. Sam Houston needed the men, but he needed the cannon. But Travis stayed. That's a picture of Travis right there. He has a very hatchet-like face, it seems like. Travis. And this is a picture looking down the Alamo. Now, this is how the Spanish colonies. They set up missions as a way to a combination of control the remaining native population, but also convert them. And because of the Comanches, they would become like a little fortification. These missions were more than a church. The church is there, but it was like a massive walled-in city where you're going to have living quarters, stables, barns, granaries, blacksmith, shops, etc. And all behind a 15 to 18-foot wall. So it's a massive place. If you go to San Antonio today, all that's left is the mission, the church itself. That's all that's left. A little bit around it, then it's all people. But the actual battle was fought, it's buildings. He didn't have enough men to hold us. It was a foolish move. Yeah, they had sometimes up to as high as 18-foot walls, but when you got to put a man every 20 foot with a breech-loading musket that you can fire maybe 2 rounds a minute, that's enough men to hold it. He should have left, but they stayed. Santa Anna got there at the end of February and surrounded it and demanded surrender. So they waited to the very Santa Anna waited for reinforcements, waited for them, hoping they would just give up and surrender. When they did not, they couldn't break out. There's no way now. And Santa Anna way outnumbers them. Early on the morning of the 6th, they charged. Now, it was actually still black, but this is trying to show the mission, but it wasn't like that. Here's the whole mission. That's the church. What Santa Anna did is, he did diversions here, here, and here. But did the main attack here. And even though the walls are 18-foot high, there weren't enough Texans. And there's another problem. Imagine they're standing at the wall, they have footsteps, so they can stand and fire over the wall. Everyone get what I mean by that? You see the problem with an 18-foot wall? You fire once, load, and they're coming closer. You fire again, load. You see the problem when they get closer. There's a blind spot under the wall. You have to literally reach over the fire. So they got to the blind spot. They charged, overwhelmed them. The leading soldiers were carrying ladders, and they just went over the top. The fight itself lasted about 25 minutes. It was over so fast. They just couldn't have enough men. And Mexicans fought with courage, the Texans fought with courage, and they're outnumbered and overwhelmed. David Crockett was a disgraced politician for Tennessee. We'll come back to him. But he happened to arrive in San Antonio just before the battle. He had a great reputation. I'll explain how we got that a little bit later. And so they made him as one of the commanders at the Alamo, and he would be caught in the siege, and he would die that day. Now, the story is that he fought and died to the very last moment. That's there, Davy Crockett's. Here he is using his rifle to beat off the Mexicans until he'd be bayoneted to death. Almost certainly that's not what happened, but we know Davy Crockett because Davy Crockett's reputation, it'd be like short stories about them. And then in the 1950s, he became not just known in the US. Davy Crockett became an international phenomenon. Television was brand new. There was a new television network called ABC, and ABC was looking for TV shows. And also there's this movie company that they were actually losing money. Their owner decided to start an amusement park and went into great amount of debt. Look back to people. This movie company was going to fall apart because of this amusement park. So ABC went to them and said, hey, we'll pay you to produce short stories for our television network. And they produced a story called Davy Crockett, 4-part, and it became phenomenal beyond your belief. Worldwide phenomenon, Davy Crockett. The song that began became a #1 song. By the way, does anybody know the company I'm talking about that started an amusement park and about went broke? Have you heard of Disney? It's Disney. And so Davy Crockett became this phenomenon. Has anyone seen the show Davy Crockett? Oh, it was huge. But that's a song. We're not going to listen to it now. I was going to play it. I'm going to save it. All the survivors, probably Davy Crockett too, were lined up and killed. Probably about 180 were killed and another 80, up to 80 people died in the battle. So 260 Texans died. Most of the non-combatants would be allowed to leave to spread the news. When the Mexicans attacked, they attacked under a black flag. And a black flag means no quarter. No quarter. At almost the same time, the southern wing of the Mexican army at a place called Goliad surrounded 500 Texan militia who literally marched into a trap, just blundered into this. And here's the flag used by some of the Texas militia there. And that's another one of those flags. Wow, that's kind of a cool flag, you got to admit. Even though, doesn't it vaguely look like that he just cut his own arm off? And he's screaming this bloody. But what did the Mexicans do to him? Shot them all. Murdered them in cold blood. Why? To force the Texans to leave. If you resist anymore, we're going to kill you. Yeah, a brutal mass murder of men who had surrendered. But they said, you're not surrendering, you're traitors because you're betraying your country of Mexico. And thus giving the Texans a powerful rallying cry. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. Remember the Alamo. So that's what all that's left is the mission. There's really not a lot there. A little bit of park, a couple statues. It's not much there at all. And I have no idea. Here's some other guy posing in front of the picture. So we have him forever in front of us. But they just about tore it down. It's amazing that the mission, the actual church itself, let alone the rest of the mission, survived. This is the 1890s, and it was just before they were going to tear it down. Valuable real estate. And look what the mission was being used for. Can you see it? A cafeteria. And somehow it survived. It's like a miracle. This incredibly important piece of not just the U.S. history, but if you know anything about Texas, the Alamo is like hollowed ground. Well, John Wayne. You know who John Wayne is? If you ever see a John Wayne movie, John Wayne played a certain character. He played John Wayne. And there's a bunch of Westerns and everything. He paid for and made a movie called The Alamo and built this set for it. And that's the set for The Alamo. And there's John Wayne right there. It's actually, okay, not very good history, but as an entertainment for movies, it's pretty good. It's almost 3 hours. But if you like John Wayne movies, and I kind of do, even though some issues with it, I enjoy them. More people go to that movie set than go to the actual Alamo today. To this day, they go to the movie set because they have things set up for the battle and go around. That just kind of makes me laugh. More people go there to the movie. Well, the Texans did run away. They called it Runaway Spring. All these Texans ran away over the Brazos River, which was the eastern border. But Santa Anna got overcome. Well, here's a painting of them crossing the river. It seemed to be working for Santa Anna, but then he divided his forces up. By dividing his forces up, that allowed Sam Houston to counterattack. Now, Santa Anna's making him feel like a net. I would just scoop off the rest of them. Never should have done that. By dividing his forces, instead of having 2,000 or 3,000 men, he had less than 1,000 men as he marched westward or eastward here. And that allowed Sam Houston to counterattack at the Battle of San Jacinto. And that is the painting for the battle. That's at the actual battle site. And it's along this small little creek, river. Sometimes you might see it called the green, sometimes a river. And Santa Anna was marching that day trying to find Sam Houston's forces. And Sam Houston kept retreating because he knew he didn't have enough men to face the Mexicans in the set piece battle. But that afternoon was unusually hot for April. And there was this flat plain next to the river surrounded by kind of scrub trees called mesquite trees. Some of you might have heard the word mesquite before. These kind of trees. And they basically stopped for a rest. Take a nap. Siesta. Because it's really hot. And they thought we had won. Let's wait and march a little bit in the evening when it's a little bit cooler. They set up a little bit of defenses. They hardly set guards. I think they thought the Texans were done. So they got, complacent. And Sam Houston from the scouts heard it and organized a quick attack. And took them totally by surprise. The Texans swept in. The Mexicans were totally unprepared. They panicked. And once the panic began, it was all over. And poorly trained draftees in the Mexican army could not handle this attack. The battle lasted 15 minutes. But the slaughter lasted for an hour. Because the Texans got their revenge. Just look at the numbers. Almost 1,000 Mexican soldiers were there and 650 would be killed, almost all of them, while trying to flee. And the rest would be caught up in the mesquite trees. Look how few Texans died. You don't need to know the exact numbers. You just need to know, it was a decisive victory. Santa Ana is totally humiliating. I should have. Mesquite, think about like scrub trees. They have thorns like this long. If you heard mesquite, they're really used for like barbecue or smoking meat. It's got a very distinct smokiness to it. But not going to lie, the first time I heard of mesquite was mesquite barbecue potato chips. Yeah, pretty cultured. But they have thorns about that long, and they tried to get through and they just ripped them apart, and the horses wouldn't go through, so they couldn't escape. So imagine they tried to run through the trees, couldn't run through that, increased the panic. Well, Santa Ana was not captured right away, and he retreated to a low hill nearby. And if he can escape, he still has 4,000 men. He can still win this war. He can still win. There's still a very good chance that Texas will not win its independence, and our entire history would be different, because Texas would lead to a series of events that led to the compromise of the Mexican War, compromise of 1850, and Civil War. The direct stepping stone. So I have to draw you a picture. So let me draw you what happened here. So just imagine kind of flat, right? Can you imagine flat? And now hill. Feel like you're there? Feel pretty good? Santa Ana, they wore blue uniforms. He and his staff went to the hill. Now I'm going to draw you. I'm a natural born artist, okay? So I just have this gift. Let me draw you Santa Ana and his staff. See? Right? Which one's Santa Ana? Well, he's the general who's got a really big hat. Okay? Good, huh? I didn't trace that. That's freehand. The Texans had a couple cannons, and they were just setting up the cannon. The battle was over. And the cannoneers are like, shoot at. Oh, there's some guys on the hill. So they start to shoot their cannon at the guys on the hill. So imagine you have a cannon, and you have, the Texans are brown, because they just had whatever clothes they had. So here's the Texans. How do we know they're Texans? Well, they're Texans, right? They got really big hats too. 10-gallon hats, right? Yeah, take a picture with words, or words with pictures. I don't know what I'm trying to say. They started firing cannonballs. They couldn't elevate the cannon. They weren't very well trained. They were hitting the hill, and the cannonballs were bouncing past Santa Ana. So imagine Santa Ana standing there, planning his retreat, watching this. Bang! Cannonball. Bang! Cannonball bounced. And Santa Ana was brave. He was not really affected by watching this. And then, bang! Cannonball hits maybe 20 feet in front, starts bouncing at him. Now, what should Santa Ana have done in that second? Right? What did Santa Ana do? Put his foot out to stop the cannon. Cannonball. Bang! Leg just snapped in half. Boom, he fell down. It's just hanging by a few tendons. He's screaming in agony. That's how Santa Ana is going to be captured, because they do a makeshift structure. They're still going to try to take him away. But he's screaming in pain. Well, they do have a painkiller, so to speak. They have opium. So he starts smoking opium as they're carrying him on a stretcher and trying to sneak him through the mesquite trees. Well, the Mexican soldiers who are captured, they really assume two things. We're going to be shot, and Santa Ana's already been killed. Well, there's a group of being held, and one of them sees Santa Ana being carried away. And they go, Santa Ana! And they all start screaming, he's alive! And so the Texans go, oh, there it is, he's captured. So Santa Ana is captured, leg hanging by a few tendons, and high on opium, captured by the Texans. And he meets with Sam Houston, who's also wounded, and guess what Santa Ana would sign? A treaty giving away Texan independence. Pretty good picture, huh? You feel like you've been in Texas now? Kind of like brag. That's pretty good. Pretty good. All right. With that, they created a republic. the Lone Star Republic. Remember that star on the Come and Get It? Well, that became the first flag. They called this also the Bonnie Blue flag, which also become one of the early symbols of the Confederacy. But later, the Republic would adopt this flag. Look familiar? Does this remind you of any other flag? I don't know. I can't think of any flag. It's an independent republic. The Confederacy would base the flag of the Confederacy on this flag. But instead of one star, it would have 11. That'd be the flag of the Confederacy. We're coming to that. Confederate battle flag that most people think is the flag. So, Texas independent. But here's the thing. First off, I should add, Mexico would immediately say that's not legit. That treaty is not legit. Santa Anna was a dictator, so he didn't represent the true people of Mexico, and he was under duress. Yeah, he was under duress. And so, Mexico will not accept this. But Texas became a republic with slave codes. And almost immediately, they asked for annexation. It was right during the election of 1836, and immediately the issue of slave power came up, and Martin Van Buren didn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. But there's also one more issue I'll show you on this map. What is Texas? Tejas was just this area in light yellow, where my hand is. That was Tejas. So is that the Republic of Texas? Well, the Republic of Texas said, no, we're claiming all land north of a very small river called the Rio Grande. And you notice the Rio Grande goes all the way up into present-day California. So they claimed all the way up to what is part of Wyoming. How many states could this be? How many slave states? Could that be 5 or 6 states? That's a huge territory, considering the size of states. If that came into the Union, slave power. So Texas became the biggest political issue in the United States after that, for the next decade. And it was all about slavery. And nobody would touch it. So, 1836. Now, let's review. We've already went over this. 1836, Martin Van Buren elected president. We've already had this. Martin Van Buren elected president. And they didn't want to touch Texas. Even though Andrew Jackson said, annex it, we won't get another chance to annex it. But he was scared about breaking up the Democratic Party. Southerners would not forgive him for this. So let's very quickly look at Martin Van Buren's administration while the Texas Republic is kind of withering on the vine. He had suffered from the Panic of 1837, which we've already talked about. They did come up with a replacement for the bank called the Independent Treasury. We're not going to go into the details. It's basically a way to distribute money to banks. It's actually a pretty good idea, but it was never implemented to its full effect. We would have some kind of independent treasury, sometimes you might say called the sub-treasury, all the way up till 1913. But then Texas was underlying it. So he's blamed for the panic and then indecision over Texas because it was so divisive. This vice president was quite the character, pretty much a rogue character. But he was a hero of the War of 1812, and he took credit for killing Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames, which he most certainly didn't, but he said he did. And why am I mentioning Richard Mentor Johnson? Because Richard Mentor Johnson had the first political slogan, long-lasting political slogan in American history. Are you ready for it? Rumsey Dumpsey, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh. It really flows off the tongue, doesn't it? Rumsey Dumpsey, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh. Yeah, rhyming wasn't a big deal. The point is, politics are changing. Jackson thought it would all be people voting for the common man and people like you. And people are starting to realize, no, maybe slogans and things like that might get people to vote. Anyways, we are coming to a massive conflict. And can only be represented by this film. You want to see this film? And this is also, and I'm not going to lie, how I got through college. catching. Oh! Well, I want to watch this part again. I used to catch cannibals. Yeah. Yeah, he was an act. He would catch cannonballs. I did not actually do this in college. One more time. You ready? The next scene is the guy who gets a cement block crushed on his head with a sledgehammer outside. I'm not sure of that. Anyways, the election of 1840. Did you like the cannonball guy? You're a little bit stunned, fathers. Stunned, overwhelmed. The election of 1840 would be the first modern election. And the first election to show you how politics had changed dramatically. Martin Van Buren, the sitting president, will run again. And he's got all the issues of the panic, but also its indecision over Texas. He refused to make a solid statement whether or not the United States would annex Texas. I should add, the Republic of Texas was falling apart while this is going on. Absolutely falling apart. Mexico demands it back. And the Republic is weak. So Martin Van Buren, but Democrats are stuck with Van Buren, but the Democrats are still convinced the common man will rally to the party of the democracy because they have to know we're the party that cares about them. The Whigs' problem is this. This is the Whig, the base of the Whig is an anti-democratic elite. They're the minority. So what are they? This is a brand new estate in northern Manhattan by the beginnings of the first very wealthy people in the United States. This is very near a thing that's about ready to build. You might have heard of Central Park. That is near Fifth Avenue. And if you go to that part of New York City, they have these unbelievable mansions. Of course, it's just buildings everywhere. But they're in the minority. They know they don't have enough. You know, their rallying cry in the initial was, common people shouldn't vote. You're too dumb. Well, it's hard to get people to vote for you when you're rallying cry is you're too dumb to vote for me, but would you vote for me anyways? You're an idiot. Vote for me. Which, by the way, that'd be a good one if someone's walking by and heard me say that. You're an idiot. Vote for me. And you guys are like, yeah, okay, get it. So they decided they needed a way to split the Democrats. So last thing you have to write down. Split the Democrats. I'll explain the nativism in just a second. If we can split their vote, find other issues besides common man, we can get people who would normally vote Democratic to vote for the Whigs and vote for the elite. How do you convince people to vote for policies that would directly benefit a minority of the population? Find something to divide them. Vote for me and I'll make rich people rich. I know what they're doing. And they'll come up with a way that I'm not going to lie. Drive this out. Huh?
You were talking.
Bye, everybody. I've never seen that. I've heard those.
Yeah. Around.
Where'd you go? Okay, yeah.
Once I take that.
Well, I mean, everyone. I'm taking the math test that I have lunch.
Yeah.
It's a seat, maybe.
When do you get it?
I think.
Are you serious? Fast. I would not be.
Yes. Right. Sure.
Well, you know, my duty is that you get called down. Stop giving me out, bro. We got the desk, we'll take a little break.
Okay.
You don't take one.
I asked you guys.
Good job.
Acquire.
Well, yeah, probably not in it.
We don't.
It's because it's all of a sudden really hard. It breathes. That's not what it's about. It's not less than everything. Here's the big two. Start. I just lost my.
I'll bet all of them down. Just.
Friday. So. And then Friday, and then. Yes. And it's on one something. Yeah, so that's where it can be snaps. Okay, right, they're getting people. Then that, so that's what the people say. And it's only 50%. So we're kind of there, then we can see how it goes.
Pounds, it's thinking.
I would do something for next to Washington. Over here almost every day. So. Which says it. Uh-huh.
One for Ox. Who said my name? Yes.
Also,
You know, if we think we can't survive computer. Give it any pressure, we're gonna fight through it. Sound good? Where is she? It's all yours.
The grade is not.
No brawling, you two are always brawling.
I'm scared. I think I've like failed.
Oh, that's the line. I forgot to turn off the recording. Everybody say goodbye to your viewing audience. Bye. Thank you. I got at least one bye.
What?